Hello, hello, welcome back to Color and Scribbles. My name is Rachel, and today we are talking about ears, and more specifically, how to draw ears. Because as I've been browsing the internet lately, I've been seeing some pretty whack ears out there, let me tell you. See, like there's some ears like this guy, where they're just super high up on his head. I've been seeing ears like this, where they're just falling off people's faces, just sliding right off there. And then there's this. I've been seeing this everywhere. I don't know if this is a popular hairdo or what, but this girl here with the little piece of hair in front of the ear, and then like people have no idea where the ear goes behind that. Like if you were to remove that little piece of hair, that ear is like on her cheek. Like that's not where ears go. It's got to be farther back. So this is a problem that I've been seeing, and I get it because like ears are crazy. Like they're just these weird little skin flappy things just hanging out on the side of your head. Where do they go? What are they supposed to look like? Well, I'm here to tell you about all that. So stay tuned to hear more about how to draw ears relatively correctly. Alright, so the first thing we got to talk about with making a convincing looking ear is placement, because really ears are not all that important. They're like off doing their own thing off there. They're usually not playing a big role in whatever painting you're making. So the actual details of the ear are not nearly as important as the placement. As long as you get the location on the head of the ear correct, you're like 90% of the way there. It's gonna look mostly right. So to start off with the front of the face, the orientation and the placement of the ear in relation to the facial features, this one's pretty simple. Basically the top of the ear goes approximately to the eyebrows, and the bottom of the ear goes approximately to the end of the nose. That is a good starting point. It's a good basis for your ears. Obviously ears can vary dramatically in size and like how far out they go and stuff. So it could be a little bit shorter than that. It could be a little bit taller than that. Usually it's gonna, if it is smaller, it's gonna be like shorter, because the ear tends to sit right above the jaw, which we'll talk about in a second. So usually it's not gonna be much higher than this, but there's exceptions. But yeah, this is a good starting point. It's a good basis. If you just want a standard, bland, boring ear, that's the location that it'll go in. So for the side of the face, where does the ear go in relation to the facial features when you're looking in a profile view? So we've got the same orientation height-wise, where the top of the ear is kind of going about to the eyebrow, maybe a little lower, and the bottom of the ear is going about to the nose. However, this I think is the #1 issue that people have when they're doing ears. This is the thing they mess up the most, is that people tend to put the ears way too far forwards on the face. I see people putting ears like up here, like that is on somebody's cheek at that point. Like that ear is growing out of their cheekbone. So make sure that your ear is far enough back. It goes pretty far back there. A placement, like one way to orient it, if this helps, is that it kind of follows the jawline. Like the front of the ear is going to kind of line up with the jaw, so that can help. And then the jaw and the ear and all of that kind of swoops down into like the middle of the neck. So maybe that'll help you orient your neck. Maybe that'll help you orient your ears. Either way, these things are all related, so hopefully this helps. Obviously you could still you could have like a really short jaw and a really short ear and a really weird neck, but hopefully at that point you'll realize that something's wrong and make adjustments to all three of them. So yeah, this is kind of what I look at, is like the orientation of the ear, and make sure that it's kind of, you know, in the middle area of the neck when I'm looking at a profile view. And then one last thing to consider with placement is when you're tipping the head up or down, we lose the orientation that we talked about earlier, because the head is kind of a sphere-ish shape. So basically this can get kind of weird, but the rule of thumb is basically that if somebody is looking up, their ears go down. So you can see that the top of the ear that we see here is like now at the nose, and the bottom of the ear is like somewhere in the middle of the chin. So that thing that we talked about earlier with the top being at the eyebrows and the bottom being at the nose, that doesn't apply once somebody starts moving their head around. So yeah, basically the way that this works, if it helps to think of it this way, is that original placement still applies. It's just that now things are on a curved surface. So it's still lining up with the tops of the eyebrows if you were to like wrap the line around the sphere of the head. And it's still lining up with the nose. We just have to take into account the circular nature of the skull. So if that helps, that's how the placement should work still. You just have to be able to think of it as a curved line instead of a straight line now. But if you're not too concerned with the exact placement, because, you know, it's harder to tell once things are moving up and down, like whether an ear is exactly correctly placed. So it doesn't matter quite as much. So just remember that if your head is tipped up, the ears go down. And if your head is tipped down, like this one down here, then the ears go up. You know, if we draw a straight line across, it's in the middle of his head. And like the bottom of the ears are almost at his eyebrows. One more thing about the tilted head is that when you're tilting back, you're going to notice that you'll see more of the bottom of the ear. And when your head is tilted down, you'll see more of the top of the ear. And that just has to do with the fact that the ear is, you know, when your head is tipped up, then the top of the ear is tipped away from you. And when your head is tipped down, the top of the ear is tipped towards you. So hopefully the logic follows there and that makes sense. And yeah, so that's the basic placement of the ear. Alright, so once you have the placement of the ear down pat, now we're going to talk about the anatomy of the ear. And when I say anatomy, I really mean we're going to talk about like the essential things that you should include in an ear that you're painting in order to make it look convincing. And you can definitely simplify from here. This is kind of like, this is about as detailed as I ever go with my ears when I'm painting them, because the ear is almost never the star of the show. Like I said before, it's usually just there because like people have ears and you gotta paint it, but it doesn't need to be super detailed. And these are basically the 4 things to include in your ear to kind of help you simplify down all these weird shapes that are happening. So the first thing is what I'm calling the hook. And it is this part right here. The hook down at the tip, down at this area, goes into the ear, like towards the head. So keep in mind that that's going to actually be curving back a little bit. And then the rest of the ear forms, or the rest of the hook, I should say, forms like the outer rim of the ear. It's hard cartilage, so it has like a hard edge to it. Some of the other parts have softer edges, but this is one that has a pretty hard edge right up until it blends into the earlobe, which is the next part that we'll talk about. The earlobe is this soft, flappy skin thing. I have no idea what it's for besides holding jewelry, but I'm sure it has a function. It's a soft skin flap down at the bottom of the ear, and it comes in many different shapes. So don't worry too much about how the earlobe looks. It could be curving back. Some people have attached earlobes. You know, you've seen ears before. You know what I'm talking about with this. The next part is the Y. So think of this little part, because this part, the closer we get to the middle, the weirder things get. So I'm hoping that this is a little helpful. This simplifies it a little bit. Think of this like a Y, or like a little shovel, you know, like this part in the middle is going to be concave. It's going to dent in and be shadowed a little bit more than the top part. This actual Y shape that I have drawn usually catches a lot of light. It's also a hard cartilage, so it usually and it sticks out sometimes farther than the hook. So you're usually going to be seeing this part even if somebody is looking straight on. So even from the front, you can usually see some portion of this Y shape, which you'll see later in the demo. Alright, and then the last part that I don't really have a name for is just the pit. I don't know, the pool, the ear pit, this part here. This is just, you know, the space in the middle, and it leads into the ear canal. So let's see, this side of it, underneath this little ear tab, that I guess is also a part, but it's just a little bump there. So, but yeah, so this part here is the deepest, darkest part of the ear, so there will always be shadows in there unless you've got some light shining directly into the ear. So that's something to keep in mind, is just this part is the deepest shadows, and then this part up under the hook also tends to be very deep in shadow because the hook forms kind of a lip that goes over that part of the Y. Hopefully these terms are making sense. But yeah, so that's something else to keep in mind, is just where the shadows go. Usually these places are almost always going to be in shadow. There's usually some form of shadow following the Y, although this part, the bottom part of the Y, tends to soften up a little bit, so the shadows won't be as hard down there. And then there's also usually some shadows between the Y and the bottom of the hook, because they come very close together at that point. So that's where your shadows are gonna go. And those are the 4.5 main parts of the ear that I like to keep in mind. They all come in many shapes and sizes and many different textures. Some people have really weird looking ears, so but yeah, there's the hook, there's the earlobe, there's the Y, and there's the ear pool or the ear pit. Name pending on that one. And then there's this little tabby thing, which is just there to make everything a little bit more lumpy and weird. So I don't know if that was helpful at all, but hopefully it was. And now we're gonna get onto a demo. Alright, so while this painting demo is playing, I'm just going to talk about a few more random tidbits to keep in mind when you're painting ears. A big one is that the ear is usually a little bit pinker than the rest of the facial skin, and that's, I assume, is because it's thinner, and so we're seeing a lot more blood close to the surface of the skin. Maybe, I'm just guessing there. But either way, it tends to be pink, especially towards the outside, especially towards that the thicker cartilage tends to be a little bit pinker, especially if somebody is cold or hot or embarrassed or, a lot of things influence the color of ears. But yeah, usually they're a little bit pinker. And something else that's super cool about them is if you light them from behind, they're kind of see-through. So like, you'll get some really interesting bright red light. Like basically when you shine light behind it, you're going to see all of the blood vessels, so it'll be very bright. So if you've got somebody who's backlit, their ears will probably be kind of like bright red on the outside just because the light is shining through the flesh, which is kind of cool. So that's a fun ear fact for the day. One other thing to keep in mind is that ears tilt out, like they're kind of wedge shaped, I guess, so they stick out of the head a little bit. So that affects the view when you're in like a 3/4 view, or when you're looking at somebody straight on, you're still going to see a good amount of their ear. So that's something to keep in mind when you're painting your ears or when you're drawing ears, is just remember that the angle of the ear off of the head is going to make it so that you see a lot more of the ear than you might think that you would see. And then I guess the last thing that I want to say is I just want to reiterate that ears are usually not important to a picture, so don't get too caught up in the details. If you want to just have a super basic ear, all you really need is the shadow, like those deep shadows in that ear pit and underneath the hook, and then some highlights on the Y and some highlights on the outer edge of the hook. If you get those, it'll look basically correct, because if you look at this, if you look at these ears that I have painted, especially the side view ones, the ones that are more in profile, and you kind of cross your eyes a little bit, you can see that it's basically, there's like this dark spot, there's these dark areas in the hook, in the pit. The rest of it is just a couple of highlights and like, some pink on the outside, and that's basically all you need in order to have an impression of an ear. So yeah, that's all I have to say about ears. They're fun to paint, they're weird looking, and everybody's ears are different, so you don't have to worry too much about making them exactly correct, which is fun. Yeah, I hope that this was helpful. If you have any other anatomical things that you would like me to do a tutorial on, let me know in the comments. And thanks as always for watching, and I hope that you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next time.